Welcome back to Proverbs. We're going to study the trio of fools that Solomon refers to in Proverbs 122. You see three different kinds of fools there. Proverbs 122. How long, you simple ones, that's the first, will you love simplicity, and the scorner, number 2, delight in their scorner, and fools, number 3, have knowledge. Wiersbe has a good commentary, I think, on the book of Proverbs. And he goes over Proverbs 1 through 10, but he also deals with the subjects that are involved. And you can see right here, this is chapter 6. Chapter 6. People wise and otherwise. The simple, the scorner, the fool. And he does a good job, I think, of dealing with those three kinds of fools. And that's what we're going to consider. But here's an example, I think. Peter Singer, professor of ethics at Princeton University. He's an unabashed atheist. He's a godfather of the animal rights movement. He rejects speciesism, that is, humans are a different species from animals. So he rejects, obviously, creation order seen in Genesis 1 and 2, where God created the animals. But then the last creation on day 6 was man in his own image. That is not said of any other creation of God, especially of the animals. At the same time, he's an abortion rights advocate. He said this in his book, Practical Ethics. Human babies are not born self-aware or capable of grasping that they exist over time. They are not persons. So he actually exalts animals over humans, as he says here. Animals are self-aware. The life of a newborn is of less value than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee. This is Richard Land. At this point, when he wrote this, he was writing as president of the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethic and Religious Liberty Commission. He said, in response to Peter Singer, Mr. Singer's basic assessment that Christianity has been a problem for the animal rights movement is correct. As Orthodox Christians, we've been almost as much a problem for animal rights as Peter Singer has been for human rights. So I would consider Peter Singer as an example of what we're studying. Warren Wiersbe in his book on Proverbs called Be Skillful. You remember that's a definition of wisdom inside the book of Proverbs, the skill for living. So I think that's a very appropriate title for his commentary. But Wiersbe shows a progression from being a simpleton to a scorner to a fool. So you notice in Proverbs 122, Wiersbe brings out that all three are mentioned. And then in his second invitation, or wisdom's second invitation, she called only to the simple and the fools in chapter 8:5. The scorner wasn't even interested in listening. He dropped out of the picture. Then in her third invitation, wisdom called only to the simple in chapter 9, verse 4, because the fools had turned away and joined the scorners. Wiersbe concludes, it is a dangerous thing to reject God's invitation to walk the path of wisdom of life. You may never get another opportunity. So we're going to look at these three kinds of fools: the gullible fool, the mocking fool, the hardened fool. You remember David in Psalm 14:1 said, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." Well, there's some controversy on Was he saying that the fool is an atheist? Some Bible teachers deny that. If you look at Net Bible notes on this, they will say he is not saying, the fool is not saying there is no God. But Thomas Constable, in his commentary on this, so this is, you remember at netbible.org you have these different versions, but you have Net Bible, and then you have the footnotes, study notes, sometimes translation notes. And so there's Net Bible's explanation that David is not saying the fool is an atheist. But when you look at Thomas Constable's notes on that, he leans towards this is a practical atheist. Okay? So let's read Thomas Constable's notes. A fool, the word is nabal, is a person who has a problem. There's different words for fool, but this is a prominent one. A fool is a person who has a problem in his or her heart more than in the head. He does not take God into account as he goes about living and is therefore morally insensitive. So there's a reference in 1 Samuel 25:25 to Abigail's husband whose name was Nabal. So we don't know if his mother named him that. We don't think so. He probably got that as a nickname because he was a fool. But then we read on in Thomas Constable's notes, he may or may not really be an atheist, and he is not necessarily ignorant, but he is living as though there is no God. This conclusion leads him to disregard the revelation. So, in essence, Thomas Constable is saying the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. This is at least a practical atheist. And Nabal in that chapter 25 in 1 Samuel was a fool. Jesus called the Pharisees fools in Matthew 23:17. This is when he gives his most scathing rebuke of the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious leaders. And in that rebuke, he calls them fools. They were religious, okay? But they were fools in that they had rejected the true God, especially Jesus Christ. Proverbs tracks the journey of a fool in this the terrible trio: the gullible, the mocking, the hardening. So let's look at the gullible in chapter 1, verse 4. This is where we begin to give subtlety. So Solomon says he's writing Proverbs. Why? Well, here's one of the reasons, one of the purposes in this introduction in Proverbs 1:1-7, verse 4. One of the purposes of Proverbs is this: to give subtlety to the simple. And then he helps us identify who is the simple. To the young man, knowledge. So here's a youth. And if we go to that chapter 7, that temptation scene, where you have this eyewitness account when this seductress comes forth, who is she trying to seduce? Chapter 7, verse 7. And she beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding. So here's a young man. He's uninitiated in life. He is very vulnerable, very gullible, but he can change. So that's the good news with this simpleton in Proverbs 19:25. Smite a scorner, and a simple will beware. 21:11. When the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise. It's like rebuking someone before all, that others may benefit from it. And the simpleton, he's young, but there's still hope for him. But if he does not respond, he becomes a mocking fool. He is ignorant of his ignorance. So now we move to the mocking fool, the scorner, chapter 13 and verse 1. A wise son hears his father's instructions, but a fool hears not rebuke. So the mocking fool scorns his parents' instructions. He is contrasted to the humble, beginning in Proverbs, but not staying in Proverbs. This is Proverbs 3:34. Surely he scorns the scorner. This speaking of God. God scorns the scorner, but he gives grace unto the lowly. Look how that verse is repeated 2 other times in the New Testament, just emphasizing the importance of humbly responding to God's word, even to rebukes. The scorner is a troublemaker. He's not a peacemaker. He's a troublemaker in whether it's the home, the church, the school, the business. Chapter 22, verse 10, cast out the scorner, and contention shall go out. Yea, strife and reproach shall cease. That is incredible right there. You got a troublemaker? Well, you're going to have trouble until that troublemaker is cast out or gets right with God. And it's more likely that the simpleton is going to get right with God. There's a hardening process. But again, they are not without hope. But if they do not respond, then they will continue to get hardened and they will become the hardened fool or the fool. Chapter 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom. They don't just deny it, reject it. They despise it. The hardened fool is a practical atheist. I want us to go to Proverbs 26 because this chapter is dedicated to the fool. And the fool must be confronted. So fool is referred to in chapter 26, which has been called the Book of Fools. That word fool is referred to 11 times in chapter 26, 1 through 12. Colin Delage states there are 11 proverbs to the fool. So if you read through these first 12 verses, and this underline the word fool. So 11 times. So it takes wisdom to confront a fool. Look at this very popular 2 verses that some think are a contradiction. 26:4. Answer not a fool according to his folly or foolishness, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Then it seems to be a contradiction, but it isn't. Verse 5. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So what does that mean? So first of all, don't answer a fool in the manner of a fool. Don't get in a shouting match. But answer a fool in substance, so that he can understand you. This is Dwayne Garrett's commentary on Proverbs Ecclesiastes in the New American Commentary. This is a very good set of commentaries if you're interested in getting a set. And this set has individual authors. There's a general editor, but there's different authors for the different commentaries, and they write in their area of expertise. So this is a good commentary. Listen how Dwayne Garrett answers this. To answer a fool according to his folly is to engage in the same emotional invective that the fool uses. On the other hand, one should not deal with a fool on his own terms, lest the imitation of folly becomes habitual. On the other hand, one must sometimes answer fools in words that they understand in order to reprimand them effectively. So that's good. And I think that's a better explanation of those 2 verses. So it takes wisdom to confront a fool. Don't answer a fool in kind, but answer a fool properly. And there is hope for the fool. Look in chapter 26, verse 12. See thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. So, I don't think there's any such thing as sinning away a day of grace, as we have sometimes heard. But I think it does get more difficult. The hardening process continues. But God's grace is greater than any sin. So if the fool is if the fool is confronted and he responds to wisdom's invitation that we looked at in chapter 8, wisdom is inviting, rewarding, exemplifying, and exhorting, then there's hope. But look at the book of Fools again. So you have this concentration on fools in chapter 26, 1 through 12. But then, so here's this general advice for dealing with the fool. But then he begins to give us specific kinds of fools, like the lazy. Beginning in verse 13, the slothful man says, there is a lion in the way, a lion is in the streets. As a door turns upon the hinges, so does the slothful upon his bed. So here's these humorous rebukes of the fool. It's a fool on the bed is like a door on the hinges. All it does is just turns. It just turns back and forth. So that's quite an example here. We've read some of these. But here's a specific fool, the lazy person. Here's another kind of fool, the gossiper. Some translations have the tale bearer, beginning in verse 20. Where no wood is, there the fire goes out. So where there is no tale-bearer or gossiper, the strife ceases. So we've already seen, get rid of a fool, get rid of the contention. Get rid of the gossiper, get rid of the contention. And then the flatterer. If you go to verse 28. A lying tongue hates those that are afflicted by it, and a flatterer's mouth works ruin. What's a flatterer? A flatterer is a liar. And that's what these last verses are describing. They lie to a person to get some kind of personal benefit. They flatter. They don't tell the truth. They lie in order to get some benefit. They're fools. So we have specific kinds of fools. Jesus rebuked the fool who would not respond. This is Luke 12:20. You fool, the hardened fool. This night your soul shall be required of you. And then, again, we want to remember 2 Corinthians 6:2. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. And continue to offer salvation and hope. Going back to Peter Singer, he had an interview with Freedom from Religion Foundation, and you can just see the journey of a fool. In that interview, he acknowledged that he was raised in a secular Jewish home. As a teenager, he often thought of God. For years, he wondered if there was some supernatural power, but as the years passed, he eventually came to believe there is no evidence for such a thing. He thought Christianity was a myth, that Christians believed that they could just hope there's something better out there. But to Peter Singer, it was just a myth. There is no evidence for such a supernatural being. So Singer moved from a simpleton to a scorner to an atheist. There we see that dangerous journey when God's revelation is rejected.